Hello, and welcome to my little tutorial on how I draw and color emotes. Specifically, this was requested by Stargirl, who I'm actually going to be using for our tutorial today. Thanks! So, what we're going to do is we're going to start with a really rough scribble. And I really mean like a really rough scribble. We don't want to know specifically all the detail that is going into it. We don't need all the detail that's going into it. We just need to get an idea of what we want the emote to look like. So specifically, this one, I've decided to give her a little heart that she's holding in her hands as she's like looking very sweetly at the screen, just as an example. So now notice how I'm not really focusing too hard on how everything looks overall. I'm just getting those shapes, the idea of them. There is going to be a little bit of cleaning up as I go, if only just so I can get an idea of what lives where. Now sometimes if there's something sitting in the very front of the screen, I will go ahead and actually close it out, or I will either fully remove it or lower the transparency, just so that I have an idea of where other elements of this emote are going to live. Now the reason I resize things is because I want to make sure that everything not only fits, but is proportional to like the chibi style that I am going for. Now that I have an idea of what the figure is going to look like, I will lower that opacity and I'll start playing around with a little bit more of the details, maybe making my pen a little bit smaller so you can see the difference between that and the original sketch. Now I'll start looking back at the character for reference and seeing what I need to add or take away or what have you. Now this still isn't going to be 110% clean, but it's definitely going to be a little bit thinner than the original sketch. Now you don't have to redraw certain elements of the design, but when it comes to like these particular eyes, I want to make sure that both the eyes and the eyebrows are still visible and they don't follow too much with the tangent of the hair, so I don't want them to get lost. Again, not perfect, just finding where elements of this design are going to live. Now sometimes in this particular instance, I don't want to have to redraw the hand because I want them to look the same. So I'm actually copy pasting and flipping the hand over just so I don't have to redraw it. What I'm looking at in particular is the square in the top half of the drawing process, which I actually adjusted the window so you can kind of see the square that I'm looking at when making sure that everything still looks right in that top corner. There we go. Now that I've got more detail in there, I can start the line art process. So once again, lowering the opacity and starting to put some line art on there. You're going to notice that I'm not going to do the line art for the stars right away. There's a reason for that. I'm going to make the stars have a different outline color just to make them stand out a little bit more from the black outline, or not necessarily fully black, the more like super saturated dark color, whichever I'm using, for the artwork of the character specifically. I think I'm also going to make the heart itself have a different outline too. Maybe like a lighter red color or something like that, just to give it some good contrast. So yeah. Now in particular, my emote pen itself is of a fairly large size, and it doesn't taper all the way off to a fine point. If you look, it goes into a slightly rounded end. The reason for that is because I don't want to have too many like ends, too many sharp ends on the design. The idea of an emote is that it is relatively cohesive and doesn't have too much detail in it. So I have a fairly large brush with a rounder tipped edge, and it also has a very high stabilization, which just means that when I draw, it has a slight delay, but also smooths out any motion that I have while drawing. So what I can do is start doing those really long motions, and I don't end up having any weird edges. Now sometimes you can see at one point in the process, it looks like it's still not entirely symmetrical. So I may not necessarily follow the line in its entirety. This also can be where I adjust the artwork itself a little bit. Like one of the eyes looks like it was a little bit larger than the other one. So I need to either adjust one and make it bigger, or I have to adjust the other one and make it smaller. You can see that like I didn't try and transfer the eyes over specifically because I do want them to look just a little bit different from each other. I'm probably going to actually transfer the eyebrows though, just because eyebrows are a mess and I do not like them. Those are just ones that in particular I don't enjoy. And now you can see they don't follow the tangent of the hair, which is what I want. And they look just a little bit different from each other. So, perfect. Later on in this drawing, you'll see that I kind of play around with the size of the stars because I want them to be big enough that they'll be seen on the emote, but I don't want them to be too big to be distracting from the overall icon. I still want to make sure that those little details of the character are shown in the artwork itself. Now that I've got all the line art done, I'm actually going to move all of them for now into a separate layer, a layer folder actually, and then I am going to start working on the coloring. Now the coloring is fairly quick. I usually will start with one piece at a time. At the moment I started with the hair. Now the way someone colors the artwork here is a little bit different than how I actually color the art itself, so I might mess around with the hue a little bit and the saturation just to make sure it looks right to how I want to color it. I usually start with a more desaturated color that's still fairly bright but not too far away from the original art, using as reference. The next color I will use actually is, if I look at the color wheel, I will go either clockwise or counterclockwise depending on the kind of saturation I want from a piece. Now, when it comes to reds, it depends, or if it comes to whatever is on this like red spectrum, the browns, what have you. Browns, yellows, oranges, reds all kind of live in the same area. And so whatever I decide to use can change how the overall shading is gonna look. If it's a red, I'll normally go counterclockwise and pick a color that is slightly to the left and slightly down. You can see that got me more of like a red tone to it. And you can see I'm making like big blocky shading. I'm not going in with too much detail. I'm not going in and trying to find all the little spaces. I'm just trying to think about where things might overlap. Now I'm slowing it down really fast because that was it with a slightly red color. But if I decided to use, say, a more yellow color, this is the overall result I can get. You can kind of see that it messes with the shading a bit if I decided to do that, which is why I went counterclockwise instead of clockwise. This is something you can kind of learn depending on where on the color wheel you are, and it also depends on what kind of lighting you're using. Say if the hair was blue instead of brown, I would probably use a color that is clockwise because I want to get that deeper blue color because I don't want it to look teal. I'll move it down and slightly to the right again. There we go. You can see it gives it more saturation rather than just going into like a slightly darker light blue color. Changing the color that's on the wheel itself is what gives the vibrance to the artwork. I actually learned this from a great tutorial. I don't remember the artist's name for the life of me now, but they did a tutorial on bushes and leaves in particular, and how the lighter the color of the leaves were, it actually turned more yellow, while when you went darker, it actually turned more blue, instead of actually doing straight green all the way. So just something to play around with for the future. So I sometimes will do only two different color differences, a shadow and a highlight. But if there's like a lot of layering, or if I want to add just a teeny bit more detail, I might add one more shadow color, before continuing on. And now I'll go in with a highlight color, which is actually going to be the exact opposite direction as the shadows. So I go back to that original color, and this time we're going to go clockwise because the shadows we've been going counterclockwise. So for the highlight, I want to go clockwise. And this time I'll go up and slightly to the left versus down and to the right. So you can see I got a more of a yellow kind of lighting there. And what it looks like is it gives it a slightly different color. In this case, I'm not too sure about it. Let me go back to my reference just to look. Yeah. It looks like it's still sort of pink, so I might play around with this color just a little bit more. I might actually, in this case, still go counterclockwise to stay in those red hues, but still go up and to the left for the highlight. Or at the very least, this is what I'll go with for now. And this one, you just want to get where the light is capturing whatever you are drawing, which can depend. It doesn't have, I'm not doing anything perfect by any means. I never really think too much. And it's sort of the opposite of the shadows. I'm just trying to find where the light might meet the shadow, just so I can give this hair some dimension. Now this pen that I'm using, you can actually tell it is a lot less stable, which means I have to go back in and do a couple more detail editing. But since the icon itself will overall be super duper small, I'm not too worried about it. I can always go back in and fix it later. You don't have to merge everything once you're done. Once I'm done with something, I like to just have it all live in the same spot. So now I can start working on another section. Let's go ahead and do these blues, like the blue jacket. Oh, it's more like a purple blue. Okay, cool. Cool. So with this purple in particular, yeah, the thing is it's purpley, but it looks like it's more of a blue in the final artwork. So that means in order to capture that, I probably want to add like maybe blues that exist in that same one, or heck, even just going counterclockwise, because I want to actually get more of this blue lighter color there. That's still too dark. So what I might actually do is I might just stay really far up at this top. And then let's see, does that look better? That looks better. So you can kind of see what happens when playing with the darkness. It gives it more dimension, but you don't necessarily need that if you're looking for just like a brighter color finish. Now this one, I kind of want to, this is where I start playing a little bit. And again, this isn't a perfect science. This is more just seeing what works and what doesn't. Because the jacket itself is very shiny and sparkly, and I can't necessarily capture all those little details, but I can make it look sort of shiny with the color itself of the jacket. And I can go one step further if I want to, and actually go ahead and change the line art of the jacket. Which again, this isn't perfect. You can play around with it however you would like and just see what you kind of want to do. I ended up deciding to keep it the darker color just so I can still see where the arms are. Oh, it looks like the color accidentally got onto the line art, which is fine. That sometimes happens if you're working with the emotes. The color that you fill might accidentally fill where the line art lives. Which again, none of this is a perfect science. Now, this heart looks a little bit dark in the shadows. What I actually ended up doing is I took a soft eraser and I just started taking out everything until I get right to that sharp edge. So it gives it like a really nice soft shadow. And you can see I also kind of played around with a couple more shadows in the heart. I'm not too sure how I want this to look. If I want it to be hard or if I want it to be soft. You can kind of see I ended up just keeping the small multiply layer that was the soft shade. And you see what I did with the outline of the heart actually is that I went in with the same color that the line art was, and I just made it a little bit thicker. That way you can really see the difference of where the heart lives versus the actual emote of the figure. That looks good. Or good enough. As long as it's good enough for you, it'll work. Now, the skin and the eyes are kind of what really make the art pop the most. That is, or at least the eyes are what make the art pop the most, and the skin is kind of like the setup for it. At least that's how my brain always functioned with it. So, once again, we follow the same kind of color shaping that we did with everything else. Going counterclockwise on the wheel, and going down to the left for the coloring. Now, what I worry about with this one in particular, you can kind of see how close it is to the highlight of the hair. I might not just go super dark with it. I might just go more... That's perfect. That's better. I might just go more saturated instead of darker, just to give it some contrast from the hair. And this is not the detail. This is just finding where things might naturally fall into shadow, or they might be folding, like the fingers holding on to the heart. And in skin in particular, I like to add just one more layer. I don't really know what to call it other than just the small folds. So like when you furrow your eyebrows, there's just a couple of extra layers of skin, so there might be slightly more color there. Or the shading inside the ear, you want to be able to see that sometimes. Or some people like to. Now this one in particular, I probably want to make her blushing a lot. So this one I'll go really heavily counterclockwise, but keep the saturation fairly high. That looks pretty good. Yeah. Because then what I'll do is I'll keep that color high and then lower the opacity. Because you don't want it to look gray. That is absolutely what you don't want. Oh, there we go. That's perfect. Perfect. We love it. All right. Now when I color the eyes, I want to make sure that I can see if there are any gaps or any spaces. So I'll start with a really saturated color that I hadn't used yet. So like in this instance, I'm going to actually use green. And this is also where I finally zoom in a little bit just to kind of see more of what I'm doing. Kind of looking around, making sure I didn't miss any spaces. Yeah, that looks good. So now I can keep it the opacity that it is, and I can start going into shading. Now, the gray shading that I use for the shadows of the eyes, I tend to always keep it in like the orange area. I don't really go into yellow. I don't really go into red. I might go into blue if, say, I am doing like a nighttime shot, or if I'm doing a cooler color drawing. But because this is very heavily like saturated and bright, I would just keep it in the orange. You can kind of see I'm keeping everything fairly circular, fairly rounded. So let me see, what color are the eyes? Lovely. Oh, these are fun. These are fun ones because the actual colors are all different from each other. So I'm going to try and find the darkest color that's on there. I'm going to put that actually on a separate layer just so I can do the same thing I did with the actual whites of the eyes as well, which is play around while not changing the opacity. Now this one's going to be a little bit different in that the eyes themselves are very cool, but they're different than how I would normally color them. So I'm kind of playing around with a mix between the actual eyes and my style, just to see if I can marry them. Sometimes the best way to get the details to match each other is to just copy and paste it, though. I will say, doesn't have to be perfect all the time, but if you want them to look as close as possible to each other, sometimes copy-paste is your best friend. All right, that's a good enough amount of detail, I think, for the eyes. Now I just got to make the highlight, which I actually will go all the way back to the line art layer, and I will go above all of the line art that I've drawn so far and just go straight in with a white pen. Get that wonderful little, I'm just a little guy. Now, the last thing we need to add is the little details of those stars that we did earlier in the different color, which we have now removed it from the line art layer. So I can just get rid of the art that I had done that before. Now, if you notice in the stars in particular, I didn't actually move the color down at all because I want these stars to stay as saturated as possible. If I could speak my words, that'd be great. Let me know if you guys want to see more fun little speed paints like this, and I will absolutely do them. The last thing we need to do is basically what I would call thickening up the art. That's the best way that I can describe it. So basically, I would put the line art and color layers into another folder, all entirely on their own, and then I'll go in and create an edge effect, and I go all the way up to about the mid-20s. I'll take the line art color from whatever the darkest line art is of this image, and I will fill it in. So you can kind of see that it just made the art a little bit thicker. And we'll do the same thing with the stars, but we're going to keep the same line art color for whatever we were using for the line art of the stars themselves. There we go, that works. I might go back in and clean up some of the overall bits and pieces of it just so that it looks relatively clean, but again, doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be 110%, just as long as you're having fun with it. And yeah, there we go. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully we'll see if I make any more of these. See ya!